Hey, what's up folks? How's it going? This is Wad. Hope you guys are all doing well. And in this video, we're going to be reviewing a product that I've been waiting over a year to actually use, and that is the BlackMagic URSA Mini. Now, this is basically a professional grade cinema camera designed for small time production companies as well as independent filmmakers. And it comes at a super aggressive price point. For camera geeks like myself, this is almost a perfect camera when it comes to the design and form factor. But when you factor in all the little quirks that the camera has, it's certainly not the most perfect solution for everybody out there. So we're going to get into this full review and find out if the URSA Mini is right for you. Now, essentially, the URSA Mini is a compact version of the full-size BlackMagic URSA cinema camera that came out a couple of years ago. Now, obviously, in terms of the design and form factor, it's quite compact, measuring 21 centimeters in terms of length, and it's about 16 centimeters in terms of width. And the camera body itself weighs just about 2.2 kilograms, or just under 5 pounds. Now, there's a couple of different versions of the URSA Mini that you can choose from. You can either get the 4K version or the 4.6K version. Both are Super 35mm sensors, and obviously you can select from EF Canon mount or PL mounts if you want to use cinema grade lenses. Now we have the base configuration, which is the 4K sensor with the Canon EF mount, and this retails for just under $3,000. And interestingly, this camera actually retails for around the same price as the cinema camera that has the Super 35mm 4K sensor. So in essence, both cameras internally are pretty much identical. You just have better ergonomics and a better form factor, in my opinion, on the URSA Mini side. Now, by all means, this is pretty much a professional grade camera designed for actual field use. It's made out of magnesium parts. It's very lightweight and strong, as we mentioned before. The whole camera is really optimized for professional workflow environments. So you have things like 12G SDI in and out ports, as well as dual XLR inputs with phantom power. You also do have physical audio gain controls for your microphone levels, as well as a headphone jack so you can monitor all your audio parameters. As we mentioned before, the base configuration is fairly economical, but don't think that you're just going to buy the camera and go out shooting with it. You're obviously going to need some Canon glass if you get the EF mount, and it does have autofocusing capabilities as well as aperture control, so it's a full active mount. The AF system over here is pretty outdated. It's contrast detection, so fairly slow and unprecise. Most people are going to use manual focus anyways, which is fine, but it would have been nice to have some kind of hybrid system like you have on most contemporary cameras. Additionally, there are going to be three main components besides the lens that you're going to need to actually have a bare bones rig. One is obviously a CFast card. Now, the CFast standard is fairly new. There's definitely a lot of benefits. It's about the same form factor and size as a compact flash card, but it's much faster in terms of its read and write throughput speeds, and it has potentially higher capacities. Now, at this point, CFast cards definitely come at a high premium cost, but if the format becomes more established, like all flash storage, the cost of production will come down. I have a 128 gigabyte CFast card from Transcend. The nice thing about this camera is there's a whole bunch of different recording formats that have different bit rates, so you can definitely get more or less depending upon how much quality and control you want in your post-production. Now next, you're obviously going to need to offload your media, and there's no real direct USB or Thunderbolt connection that goes from your computer to your camera. You're going to need a CFast card reader, and this is a pretty good one from Lexar over here. And last, but kind of an extra option, but certainly an essential one if you're going to be using this thing out in the field, is you're going to need an external battery. And sadly, there's not really a battery that comes with the camera. It only comes with an AC power connection, which is fine for studio work. But if you do want to go remote shooting with this, you are going to need a V-Lock battery backplate for this camera, in addition to an external battery that uses the V-mount standards. And there's definitely a lot of options available at different capacities and at different price points. Would have been nice to have a battery included in the entire package when you first buy it, but this is kind of to be expected for a camera in this category. Now, in terms of the controls and operations, this camera is actually fairly easy to use. There's a big 5-inch articulating capacitive touchscreen, which is very responsive and easy to use, and most of your camera settings and parameters are going to be done through the menu, which does make sense. Now, in terms of getting your exposure settings right, there are some quirks to the camera. For example, example, controlling your iris or aperture is done through the forward and back buttons on the left hand side, which are quite small, and the function of what those buttons do isn't immediately apparent. So it would have been nice to have a dedicated scroll dial, perhaps on the hand grip, for your aperture. And just in terms of controlling other aspects of your picture, such as the white balance, the ASA, as well as the shutter angle, all those things are controlled in the menu, and it's very hard to change them on the fly when you're shooting. And would have been nice to have some dedicated controls for, let's say, white balance and shutter angle like you have on some other professional cameras. But certainly when shooting in these low compression formats, you can change all those parameters in post, but it still would have been nice to have some physical buttons and control over some of these important picture parameter settings. Now, one of the great things about this camera is certainly the amount of variety you have in terms of different recording formats. Firstly, in terms of the resolution, you can either shoot in two different 4K standards and obviously in full HD, and all of those have different compression rates. Now, when you shoot RAW, you're pretty much shooting the native resolution of the sensor, which is 4000 by 2160. You also have the Quad HD standard, which is 3840 by 2160, and of course full HD. And in the Quad HD and full HD standards, you can shoot in Apple ProRes either in 444 or 422, and each of those actually has different parameters for the amount of compression. You can shoot all the way down from 5.6 megabits per second to all the way to 250 megabits per second, depending upon your need and the amount of room you have on your card. Now, in terms of frame rates, you can shoot all the way from 23.98 to 60 frames per second. Now, there is also a mode when you go into the windowed mode of the sensor where you can shoot 120 frames per second in full HD. Sadly, there is no 4K option for slow motion mode, and the slow motion that we have over here is purely done from a functional basis, but it's kind of cool how you can do 120 frames per second on this thing. Now, the video quality coming out of this thing is absolutely sensational, especially in well-lit conditions, and we'll talk about some of the downfalls of this camera sensor. Now, in terms of one of the big highlights is we have a global shutter, so if you shoot at 30 FPS, you can actually get no jello motion or that rolling shutter effect that you find on most CMOS sensors, which is excellent if you want to shoot some fast motion without that jello vision. And obviously, when you shoot at ProRes 444, the dynamic range is absolutely excellent, and RAW it's going to be even better. You have up to 12 stops of potential dynamic range, so the camera definitely has a lot of latitude, so you can get the most information from your highlights and shadows, and obviously change everything when it comes to color timing and everything like that. And you get a free copy of DaVinci Resolve, which is always awesome with these Blackmagic cameras. Now, the sharpness is, as you would imagine, in the 4K setting, absolutely sensational. Extremely sharp image. With this kind of throughput and bitrate, you're obviously going to expect a really great looking image, and this URSA Mini is really no exception. And when it comes to the biggest problem with this camera, and it might be a huge turnoff for some of you guys out there, is that the ISO limit is up to 800 ASA, and that's pretty much it. And you can obviously push the camera more in post, but if you are going to shoot in low light conditions, this is definitely not a camera that's optimized for that. Even if you have fast lenses, you're going to really need to get the best kind of lighting environment possible in order to get the best image. When you are setting at ASA 800 and there's very little light information, you are going to notice some noticeable banding and a noise pattern that is very, very obvious. And this is kind of unacceptable, especially these days with cameras from Sony and Canon that are offering excellent low light performance upwards to 10,000 ISO without even a hint of any kind of degradation of the image. So when you are looking at a more flexible run and gun shooting environment, this camera is really not optimized for that. You really want controlled lighting condition in order to get the best image possible, but this is a huge limitation and might be a turnoff for some of you folks out there. Now, to summarize everything we've talked about thus far, let's do a pros and cons list to see if this thing is worth it for you. We'll start with the stuff that I did like about the camera. Firstly, I love the modular design. It's an excellent camera in terms of form factor and ergonomics, and the build quality is impeccable. Certainly, there's a level of customization which is going to be excellent for people that want to configure their own rigs for this camera. Next, you have excellent audio options on this camera. Not only do you have dual phantom powered XLR inputs, but you have great monitoring options, so it's excellent for both the actual video quality and the audio is going to be up there as well, which is just as important. Furthermore, I really do like the full HD 1080p 5-inch touchscreen. It's very responsive, and with focus peaking and a full histogram, it's an excellent companion to this overall package. The other thing I like is the global shutter. There's not a lot of cameras in this category that offer this feature. It's mostly found on really high-end camcorders, and this is going to be excellent for shooting fast motion action and everything like that without that rolling shutter effect. Continuing forward, I really do like the overall look of this camera, especially in well-lit conditions. It's very clear, can resolve a lot of fine detail, and it's excellent for studio-like environments. And since there's plenty of different recording options, it's fairly flexible for all types of shooters, and it's going to really optimize your post-production workflow. And the last thing I like about the camera is the overall competitive price point. Now, obviously, you're going to need a couple of essential accessories, but even at the kind of baseline configuration that we have, is very competitively priced and very difficult to find a camera with all these features and a 4K raw cinema camera, especially in the established market from other manufacturers. So even with all of its caveats, you definitely have to consider the price point that this thing comes at. Now, moving on to the cons of the camera, firstly, you're going to need the CFast cards. Now, CFast, as we mentioned before, it's an unestablished storage solution. It's fairly expensive, and you're kind of gambling on whether that whole format takes off or not. Furthermore, I did mention that I do like the 1080p display that we have over here, and it's nice that you do have some articulation, but it's only 90 degrees plus or minus. It doesn't actually flip out 180 degrees like some other cameras in this category. Would have been really nice to have a little bit more of an articulating screen, especially if you do a lot of self-filming projects where a flip-out screen becomes more essential. Next, as we mentioned before, there's no dedicated controls for things like shutter angle, ISO, or white balance. Would have been nice to have those, especially if you want to change them if you're previewing an image, and it kind of sucks to have to always go into the menu to adjust some of those parameters. Furthermore, this is more of a minor gripe based on the type of camera this is, but there is no battery included in the box. That's going to be a separate option, and you are going to also need the V-Lock plate adapter in order to fit some of these third-party batteries onto, as we mentioned in the review. Just another added cost that you have to consider. And the final gripe I have is with the low light performance. As we mentioned, ISO 800 is certainly unacceptable these days and is subpar compared to the cameras in this category, and that really is a huge downside that, again, might turn off some people. But really, other than that, guys, that's really it. I want to give a big shout out to B&H Photo for actually letting us do a full review on the Blackmagic URSA Mini. Without them, this video wouldn't be possible. And if you are interested in anything we talked about, check out the links in the description down below for specific product details and pricing. Thanks again for watching. Let me know if you have any questions in the comment section down below, and we'll see you later. Take care.